March 1975. Studio 6B, Burbank. The red light on camera 1 never blinked. The Tonight Show had been recording live to tape for 3 years by then, but the illusion remained intact. 30 million Americans believed they were watching something spontaneous, unrehearsed, dangerous in the way only live television could be. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk, the same oak veneer surface he had commanded since 1972, his hands folded in that particular way, casual enough to signal ease, controlled enough to remind everyone who held the microphone. Across from him, Bette Davis exhaled a thin trail of cigarette smoke into the studio lights, her eyes sharp behind the haze, her posture erect in a way that belonged to another Hollywood entirely. She was 67 years old. Carson was 49. Between them stretched not just 18 years, but an entire vanished empire of studio contracts, censorship codes, and star-making machinery that no longer existed. Davis had been famous before Carson was born. She had fought Jack Warner in court, defied production heads, survived exile in Europe, and returned to Hollywood on her own terms when most actresses her age had been retired by force. Carson understood this. He understood, too, that his show had become the only remaining throne room in American entertainment, the place where careers were consecrated, where reputations were tested, where the country decided what it thought about fame. The Tonight Show desk was not furniture, it was a border. On one side sat America's most trusted man, the Midwestern son of Nebraska who had learned to weaponize his own modesty. On the other side sat everyone who needed America to remember them, forgive them, or discover them for the first time. The desk made that negotiation possible. It promised fairness. It promised that Carson would not humiliate you unless you deserved it, that he would protect you if you were genuine, that he would expose you if you were false. Davis knew this. She had been in the industry long enough to recognize power when it wore a cardigan. What Carson had built by 1975 was not just a television program. It was a nightly referendum on American culture, a continuous vote of confidence conducted in real time before an audience that spanned every demographic, every region, every political affiliation. Presidents appeared on The Tonight Show because refusing the invitation signaled fear. Comedians measured their entire careers by whether Carson invited them to the couch after their stand-up set. Authors sold books, actors revived stalled careers, musicians broke into the mainstream, all because Johnny Carson nodded his approval. The show was not entertainment, it was infrastructure. Davis had appeared on the show before, but this visit was different. Her career had entered a strange new phase. She was no longer the leading lady, no longer the femme fatale of All About Eve or the doomed aristocrat of Jezebel. She had become something Hollywood did not know how to categorize, a survivor, a character actress who played grotesques and madwomen, who appeared in low-budget horror films alongside younger actors who treated her like a relic. She was still Bette Davis, still formidable, still capable of commanding a room with nothing but her diction and her gaze. But Hollywood had moved on. The Tonight Show had not. Carson opened the segment with his usual practiced warmth, the kind of graciousness that felt effortless because it had been rehearsed into instinct. He asked about her recent work, about the state of the industry, about the rumors that she was difficult on set, questions designed to provoke honesty without cruelty, to create the appearance of danger without actual risk. Davis answered with the sharpness she had made her signature. Yes, she was difficult because mediocrity was intolerable. Yes, the industry had changed, and not for the better. Yes, she missed the old studio system where actors were property, but at least the property was valuable. And then, in the way that only live television allows, the conversation shifted. Davis leaned forward, the cigarette held between two fingers like a conductor's baton, and said something Carson had not expected. She told him a secret, Not a scandal, not a publicity stunt, but a genuine confession about her early career, about a decision she had made in 1937 that nearly destroyed her, about the men who had tried to control her and the lengths she had gone to reclaim her autonomy. The details do not matter as much as the fact that she spoke them aloud, on national television, without warning, without the protective distance of a memoir or an authorized biography. She said it directly to Carson, and through him, to America. Carson's face changed. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in his posture that replaced his usual animated reactions. He did not interrupt. He did not deflect with a joke. He did not glance toward the producers standing just off camera, the men whose job was to cut to commercial if something went wrong.
What Davis had done, intentionally or not, was violate the unspoken contract of The Tonight Show. The show thrived on intimacy, but it was a carefully managed intimacy, a simulation of candor that allowed guests to seem vulnerable without actually risking anything. Carson excelled at creating this illusion. He asked personal questions, he laughed at self-deprecating stories, he made his guests feel safe enough to reveal themselves, but only up to a point. The line was invisible, but absolute. Davis had crossed it, and Carson let her. This was the power he wielded, the authority that made him more than just a host. He decided in real time what America would tolerate, what it needed to hear, and what would be too much. He could have interrupted Davis mid-sentence, could have softened her confession with humor, could have steered the conversation back toward safer territory. He chose not to. He let the cameras keep rolling. He let the moment breathe. He let Bette Davis say what she needed to say, and in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that The Tonight Show was still capable of surprise, still capable of truth. The studio crew, veterans who had seen thousands of interviews, understood what was happening. The cameras did not cut away. The boom operator kept the microphone steady. The director in the control room resisted the instinct to signal a commercial break. They trusted Carson to know what he was doing, trusted that he had calibrated the risk correctly, that he would land the moment without letting it spiral into something the network could not broadcast. That trust was earned over 13 years of near-perfect judgment, 13 years of never losing control, even when the show seemed on the verge of collapse. When Davis finished speaking, the silence held for 3 seconds, an eternity in television time. Carson nodded once, slowly, and then said something so quiet that the audience had to lean in to hear it. He thanked her, not for the story, not for the confession, but for trusting him with it. He acknowledged what she had done without making it larger than it was, without turning it into a spectacle. He restored the equilibrium of the show by treating her revelation as though it had always been part of the plan, as though he had known all along that this was where the conversation would go. The audience exhaled. The applause sign blinked on. The band played into the commercial break. What happened in those few minutes was not dramatic in the way television is usually dramatic. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no scandal that would dominate the next day's headlines. But it was television at its most essential. Two people sitting across from each other, negotiating the distance between performance and truth, with 30 million witnesses and no second take. It was the kind of moment that could only happen on The Tonight Show, because only The Tonight Show had earned the credibility to hold that space. Bette Davis never appeared on the show again. She continued working, more horror films, more character roles, more interviews where she said exactly what she thought without apology. She died in 1989, 2 years before Carson retired, and the obituaries remembered her defiance, her talent, her refusal to disappear even when Hollywood wanted her to. A few of them mentioned her final appearance on The Tonight Show, the night she told Johnny Carson something no one expected to hear. Carson himself rarely discussed the interview in later years. When asked about memorable guests, he would mention comedians, musicians, politicians, people who had surprised him with their wit or their honesty. He did not talk about Bette Davis, not because the moment was unimportant, but because he understood that some things did not need to be explained. The interview existed, it had aired, people remembered it. That was enough. The desk remained. After Carson retired in 1992, after Leno took over and then Conan and then Leno again and then Fallon, the format persisted. A host behind a desk, a guest in a chair, a conversation that promised spontaneity within a structure designed to prevent disaster. But the authority Carson had wielded never transferred. Later hosts were popular, successful, well-liked. None of them were trusted the way Carson had been trusted. None of them could hold a silence the way he held it that night in 1975, when Bette Davis told him a secret and he let the cameras keep rolling. What Carson understood and what made him irreplaceable was that television's greatest power was not in what it showed, but in what it allowed people to believe. He made 30 million strangers believe they were in the room with him, that they were part of a conversation rather than an audience. He made guests believe they were safe, even as he maintained absolute control over their reputations. He made the show feel spontaneous while orchestrating every second of it. The desk was the symbol of that control. It separated him from his guests, marked the boundary between performance and reality, and reminded everyone that he was the one who decided when that boundary could be crossed. Bette Davis understood this too.
That trust between Carson and his guests, between Carson and his audience, between Carson and the medium itself, was the architecture on which The Tonight Show was built. It was invisible, unspoken, and absolute. It made the show possible. It made moments like this possible. And when Carson retired, when he walked away from the desk for the final time, that trust went with him. The Tonight Show continued. Television continued. But the country never again had a single figure who could sit behind a desk and decide in real time what America was ready to hear. Carson had been that figure for 30 years, and when he left, the role dissolved. No one replaced him because the role itself no longer existed. The fragmentation of media, the rise of cable and then the internet, the collapse of the shared national experience, it all made Johnny Carson's kind of authority impossible. But in March 1975, it was still possible. Bette Davis leaned forward, told him a secret, and he listened. The cameras kept rolling, the desk held its place, and for a few minutes, television was exactly what it promised to be, a window into something real, something human, something that could not have happened anywhere else. The red light on camera 1 stayed steady. The audience watched, and Johnny Carson, with nothing but his silence and his stillness, reminded everyone why they had been watching him all along.